You're watching World Today. I'm your host, Omar Khalid. But today, as all other days, we are going to discuss important topics of the day that plague Pakistan and that plague the world. Today, our topic will be on three important points that concern the United Nations directly or indirectly. The first is Pakistan proposing a 6-point plan at the United Nations to counter racism, religious hatred and Islamophobia. We will talk about those 6 points in detail as well. The second agenda of today's show is the new strategic engagement plan that Pakistan and the European Union have signed for greater cooperation and stronger ties between the two sides. And our last part of the show, of course, will talk about the Palestinian cause and how Pakistan is committed to this Palestinian issue. Not since yesterday, but since the last few decades. And it has reaffirmed this dedication to the Palestinian cause, pledging at the conference for the cash-strapped UNRWA, or the United Nations agency that assists Palestinian refugees, by announcing a fresh commitment for financial support. Now, these are the three important points, as I said, related directly or indirectly to the United Nations. And we will begin our conversation. I'll introduce my guest to you. She is Reema Shaukat, an analyst. Thank you very much, Reema, to have joined us. Reema, as it's going to be more of a one-on-one conversation, so let's begin with the first segment, the 6-point plan at the United Nations that Pakistan has proposed to counter racism and religious hatred. You know that Prime Minister Imran Khan also in June this year at the OIC also talked about the same thing, Islamophobia, religious hatred that exists around the world. We've seen what has happened in Christchurch. We have seen the hatred against Muslims that fans not only around the world in the West but also in our neighborhood in India, how that bigotry continues and how people of Kashmir also suffer because of the same hatred and Islamophobia. How important is the 6-point plan? Before we go discuss point by point the 6 points, let's talk about the whole aspect of it. How important is this strategy, that plan that Pakistan has proposed to counter racism and religious hatred?
Thank you, Omar, for inviting. Before coming to Islamophobia, what are the points presented in United Nations by Ms. Maliha Lodi? We actually have to see what Islamophobia is. Islamophobia actually is defined as creating fear among societies against Muslims. So if we look back, we find that this terminology existed before 9/11, but after 9/11 we have seen this use of extent of this terminology, and often Muslims are referred as those who are you can say that terrorism or Islamophobia, they are interconnected or often
when there is no link whatsoever.
Western societies. This is actually what Western societies do. But literature suggests that this terminology even existed back in 1990s or something like that. So this terminology, you can say, or this Islamophobia or racism or fear against Muslims, this is not a new thing. But in West, we have seen that over the years, this is getting more and more influential. We have seen that in US, you see that there are attacks on Muslims, particularly in schools. So that is also a form of Islamophobia, or that shows that they have this racism against Muslims.
But even beyond the US, you know, Reema, I mean, look at Christchurch, look at what happened there.
True. And now Ms. Maliha Lodi has presented 6 points agenda, and she said that there are certain ways to counter this. So she said that you have to present a legislation, and countries should come forward with some kind of legislation. The problem is we have legislation, we propose certain strategies, but there should be implementation of those strategies.
True.
We come up with certain new ideas, we come up with new techniques, we come up with new innovative ideas, but in West we see that this use of social media is bringing more and more problem for Muslims. There is no check, there is no monitoring on social media. If we talk about our country, we see the same. And if we talk about West, they also have, with technology, they have this more use of social media, and we see that it goes unchecked. So this fear for Muslims is, penetrating in a way that they are or you can say that it is actually injected through social media, so that those Muslims living in Western societies, they are getting more and more problem there. So
do you feel it is a deliberate attempt to fan hatred against the Muslims? And this fear that you talk about so vehemently, is this also instilled as a deliberate measure by certain sectors in the world?
It can be, because if you recall Trump's speech before the presidential elections, he also talked about giving favoritism to those Americans, and talked about certain things which were against the migrants or the Muslims, and that actually showed that how his policies are based on racism. And they actually, the people living in America, they had this fear that when once Trump will come into power, he will definitely engage more and more strategies or more techniques to ponder Muslims. And we see that how US is engaged in Afghanistan, how US is engaged in Middle East. They actually say they have the fear of IS. They say that we are trying to crush Al-Qaeda. But you see, I can say in a way that Muslims are linked with terrorism, but which is not. And
I mean, there's no direct link, is there, Reema? In fact, it really depends on the people and not which religion they really belong to. Yes, there is the fact of IS, there is the fact of Al-Qaeda, and that they are Muslim extremist organizations, but that does not mean that Muslims should always be equated with terrorism, or Muslims never equal terrorists. And this is the whole idea that has been fanned not only by a certain quarters in the West and in the East as well, but also by social media that you very ably pointed out.
You were talking in the beginning about the Prime Minister's speech in the OIC summit.
Yes.
He actually started with this point that he feels that there is a lack of response by Muslim Ummah and Muslim countries against this Islamophobia.
True.
So we have to work on this. If we look around us, we see that there is no narrative by Muslim countries on this Islamophobia particularly, and we see that there is no, literature available. If we have some literature coming from the West, which points out how Islamophobia is, what Islamophobia is, and they are trying to, there are different storybooks, there are different literature available in their schools and universities, which actually portrays Muslims as the extremist.
All right.
But unfortunately, in Muslim world, we don't have such narrative, we don't have such literature to counter that.
We don't have such narrative or literature to counter all the aggression and negativity that has been emanating from the Western world. We've been joined by General Talat Masood, Senior Analyst. General Sahab, thank you very much to have joined us. Sir, you must have now known about the 6-point plan at the United Nations that was proposed by Pakistan.
Today it was in the
and this.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, of course, this was arranged by Pakistan along with the United Nations, Turkey and the Holy See at the headquarters of the world body. Sir, this is not the first time that Pakistan talks about Islamophobia. In April this year, the United Nations General Assembly also adopted a resolution that was moved by Turkey and co-sponsored by Pakistan that also had strongly condemned violence and terrorism targeting individuals belonging to religious minorities. This is but an extension of that, but talks mostly about Muslims. How important is this 6-point plan in this day and age, sir?
I think it's very important to sort of emphasize that it's very wrong to only target the Muslims because this is a worldwide phenomena. In fact, the Secretary General today, I don't know whether you had an opportunity of looking at an article written by the Secretary General. This must have been written, earlier, but it was today in Express Tribune, an article by him saying that how wrong it is for people to sort of apportion blame, on Islam and say that. And similarly, he has also talked of other religions, but he has also talked of Islam. So I think it's a very good thing what our representative Malia Lodi has done to highlight that it's not the religion which has nothing to do with it. It's the circumstances, and it is also universal, this phenomena of extremism and terrorism and all those which are associated, wrongly with Islam. So I think this sort of not only a resolution or a statement, but I would say that all the Muslim countries, and especially I think they also, some sort of a similar thing had been mentioned at the OIC last time, but it doesn't make much, it doesn't go very far, these things, unless the Muslim countries are genuinely serious about it and also take measures which are so like what Pakistan is taking in order to eliminate extremism and terrorism, so that the world knows that it is not peculiar to any religion, but it is a global
Talat
phenomenon.
Masood Saab, you talked about OIC and how Pakistan had also addressed Islamophobia at the OIC. Now, I would quote unquote something that Mr. Imran Khan said at the OIC in June. He said that some Western countries are suffering from Islamophobia. The West should differentiate between modern Muslims and extremist Muslims, and that the international community has to respect the feelings of the more than 1 billion Muslims. Do you feel that Pakistan, this is not the first time that Pakistan talks about Islamophobia, sir, and you know that very well. In April this year also, we along with Turkey talked about the minorities and how the people target the religious minorities, and now we've taken out the 6-point plan. Do you feel that countries will react to it, respect the sentiments from the Pakistani side or what the Pakistani side has been emanating, or is it going to fall upon deaf ears? This is very important, sir, because Islamophobia becomes a very important issue as each day passes by.
Well, I think it will make a difference, certainly, all these statements, but I think more than the statements, the facts, as to how the countries are conducting themselves and what is happening in these countries, to what extent is there religious prejudice or extremism permeated in the society of these countries. That is very important. So I think that the test is that how these Muslim countries are also implementing what they are saying. And of course, as you are aware fully and others, that there is a certain element of prejudice and a certain propaganda which goes against the Muslim countries. So I think we have to go a little further as far as trying to convince the world that the Muslim countries have societies in which they have full freedom and full liberty. There is no such thing as discrimination. I think that is also important. You must have realized that there is also a report by the US on religious minorities. I don't know. I wonder whether you know that.
Of course, sir, I do. And thank you so very much, sir, to have joined us and given us your point of view on this very important issue that is Islamophobia. Coming back to you, Rima, one of the points that I will like to talk about and extend, because this is somehow an extension of that 6-point agenda, and it is the second point of the 6-point plan that Maliha Lodi Sahiba talks about, monitoring social media platforms to prevent hate speech and negative stereotyping. Look at the social media platforms. Open Twitter at any moment of time, or Facebook, or other social media platforms. You find a lot of hatred spewing. I mean, there is a lot of negativity, but there's a lot of racial hatred that specifically targets minorities, religious minorities such as Muslims. Do you feel that the social media heads can be pressurized enough to counter that, to control that, to monitor that to some extent, or will it go on?
Because you see that these social media platforms generally originate from the West, like Facebook, Google, Twitter, they all have their offices based in the West. So why not? We can pressurize them, but for that we really need to have a strong narrative of ours, which can actually counter their narrative. See, if they are saying something about Islam, or they are talking about blasphemy, or they are talking about anti-Muslim, sentiments, we should have strong strategy. We should have sorted out our things that we have to, how we have to counter that. I always talk about that we have to do necessary homework before
Very
coming on
important.
an international platform. So if we, 2 days back, I was on another channel and they were talking about the visit of head of Amir of Qatar, and before that we had a Malaysian Prime Minister and visit of MBS. So they were saying that you see that Pakistan has tilt towards Muslim countries. We need to have a strong foreign policy, and we should engage with the Western countries. And if we go on an international platforms, we should have done our homework. We should have placed certain things on the table. Like if you want to talk about Kashmir issue, you should have done your homework on the Kashmir issue. If you want to talk about Islamophobia, or you want to talk about engagement of West in Afghanistan, and you see how West actually links terrorism and extremism with Afghanistan and Pakistan, you should have done necessary work on that, and you should have a strategy to defend yourself and portray that how actually you are not like that. But West think that if in Pakistan, I always say that Pakistan has, after this long war, they actually have to improve their soft image. We have to improve our image across the world, that how we are and how
Rima, you seem
we
very critical of all that. Do you feel we are not doing enough? We are not doing our homework properly?
We have done much, but still we have to do more, because you see, it has taken a long time to come, it has taken a long time for Pakistan to come on its place which it is having right now. You see, after war against terrorism, there was no investment coming in Pakistan, there was no, tourism coming to Pakistan. So how we have to improve our image, that is important. So for that, you have to do, I always say that you have to do necessary homework. So if you are going on in international platforms, or if Maliha Lodi is talking about Islamophobia in the United Nations, we also have to activate that OIC platform. See, that is the Organization of Muslim Countries. So Muslim countries should have
we did talk about
narrative,
that.
And I often say that we should have a joint media of Muslim countries which can portray their, or which can depict their sentiments, which can actually show the true picture of Islam. And as you were saying that Prime Minister talked about that we should differentiate between moderate Muslim and extremist Muslims. So media can play a very important role how we are going to define what is moderate and what is an extremism. And if you talk about social media, you definitely have to keep a check on that. So,
way back in April, when the resolution was moved by Turkey and co-sponsored by Pakistan, that was also condemning the violence and terrorism, targeting individuals belonging to religious minorities. That was, of course, in the aftermath of what had happened in Christchurch. At that time also, Maliha Lodi Sahiba had talked about pervasive Islamophobia that is becoming a global phenomenon. And she had asked for a collaborative, coherent and committed global response in this regard. April, we are now what? July, all right. 3 months have passed.
And
do you feel
she made a speech, so
again because we are reiterating the fact again and again that Islamophobia is a growing threat to a huge, more than a billion population of Muslims around the world, and this is going to become an even more important problem in the months and years to come, and this has to be tackled with properly at different fora.
Omar, she is sitting at an international platform where number of countries are around her, and she is observing each and everything daily. She is living in US, and I was talking to you initially about the schools in USA, which actually do not keep a check on their literature, and there is a growing Islamophobia, or I was telling you that they are actually trying in a way that it is penetrating in their society. So we need to have something productive to control this.
Freedom of expression also, freedom of expression is something that is good, we need to express, but there needs to have a certain limit to that freedom of expression. That freedom of expression, in my point of view, and I'm sure you would collaborate with me, should not kind of go beyond the limit when it fans hatred against any minority, and that includes the Muslims.
And same goes for Christians also.
Exactly.
Like if any Muslim targets the sentiments of Christians, he will not be liked in his society. Another point which Ms. Maliha Lodi also mentioned was that this growing Islamophobia is also associated with the migrants which are moving towards West. See, we have this region of Middle East, South Asia and other which are going through turmoil, and there is a major refugee influx towards the West. So those migrants who are going towards the West, they also have to keep a check on themselves also, apart from government, the Western governments checking them. They also have to keep a check on them, or they have to keep a balance, present themselves as a balanced Muslim, so that this, the feeling or the, you can say that whatever they are thinking or an image they portray about Muslim, that should be changed.
Of course. Now also let's come to the third point that she talks about in this 6-point plan. She talks about a focused strategy to counter Islamophobia. When she talks about a focused strategy, in your point of view, what should be a focused strategy to counter Islamophobia?
I earlier mentioned that we need to have a strong counter narrative. You see, we have one Muslim university in Egypt which actually issues the sermons, or you call it fatwa for the Muslims or something. Why don't we have, there are so many Muslim countries, and Pakistan itself is an Islamic country and a nuclear powered country. Why can't we have some strong content to present to the West about the Islamophobia? So we need to do a necessary homework, or we need to chalk out those strategies how we can counter.
All right.
I talked about immigrants going to the West. Definitely they also can play a major role. How they carry themselves, how they live there, how they live in Western societies, that also portrays their image in countering Islamophobia. Then we can have a literature for if we have a literature in West, then we need to have that literature or some polemics, you can say, to counter that Islamophobia.
All right. Well, before we go on to the next topic, let me also narrate the 3 other points that Maliha Lodi Sahib has talked about in the 6-point plan. She talks about increased investment in research to identify the root causes of religious hatred, increased engagement of the women and youth. Of course, the women and youth make up for a huge majority in this world population. And of course, increased investment in education, because once people of the world are educated, they will understand the difference between proper narrative and a negative narrative, and what is hated and what is not, and what is fanning sectarianism or hatred against the Muslims. Now, Reema, this brings me to the second point, that is our growing strategy with the European Union. Now, Pakistan and the European Union have signed a new strategic engagement plan on Tuesday. And this is for greater cooperation and stronger ties between the two sides. It is called the SEP, ladies and gentlemen, or the Strategic Engagement Plan. It was signed by Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi and the European Union High Representative Federica Mogherini at a ceremony in Brussels. How important is the relationship between Pakistan and the European Union?
Omar, it is very important and critical and crucial at the moment. You see that US is engaged in Middle East, US is engaged in South Asia, USA is trying to get out of Afghanistan, and for that it needs to support to have the support of all the regional powers. And on the other hand, we see that US is engaged with Iran also. So in that context, Pakistan plays a very major and crucial role at the movement. So we have seen that over the few months, Pakistan is tilting towards its bilateral relations with European Union. See, it is good to an extent that our foreign policy now understands the dynamics of bilateral cooperation, not only looking towards the West or the United States as a superpower. We have shift in our policy towards China, Russia, and we are relying more on strategic relationships with Russia and China. And same goes for European Union. Like Pakistan is looking for some better market in European Union also. So bilateral cooperation apart from other countries.
You remember the GSP plus status that we got as well.
Exactly. So in this security engagement plan that
Strategic
is a
engagement
strategic
plan.
engagement plan that is signed between European Union and Pakistan at Brussels. It is important in the context that it talks about disarmament, non-proliferation, and counter-terrorism. See, European Union is also facing the challenges of terrorism, and they understand that Pakistan has played a very important role in war against terrorism, and they know how to tackle it. Although it took a long time for Pakistan to get out of it, but they know how to counter this terrorism, and they are. We have seen that we have certain governing bodies here in Pakistan which are working day and night to counter this terrorism. So European Union definitely can learn from this, or they can suggest us some better models to counter this terrorism. Also, when we talk about regional cooperation, non-proliferation, and disarmament dialogue. So you see, we have a neighbor, we have India in our neighbor, which is constantly relying on American and Israeli market for the buying of weapons. Pakistan has to prepare itself for all kinds of threats.
All right.
That are 24/7, you can say. So I think to counter those threats portrayed by India or the other countries, Pakistan needs to have good relations with Pakistan, European Union, and other countries.
All right. Pakistan needs to have better relations with the European Union, and the SCP is just one more step in that direction. We've been joined by Muniza Jahangir. Muniza, thank you very much to have joined us. How do you view the strategic engagement plan between Pakistan and the European Union? Do you feel that this is going to be a step forward as far as EU's engagement and strengthening of bilateral relationship is concerned?
Well, as far as the European Union is concerned, they remain very concerned about certain human rights issues in Pakistan in the recent past. I know from my sources, at least, that the European Union remains concerned about lack of freedom of expression in Pakistan, on the new kind of curbs that have been put on the media, and on the clamping down of certain opposition members. They remain concerned with that, and I do know that the GSP plus status, one of the conditions, the preconditions of the GSP plus status, which allows Pakistan access to European markets, is that Pakistan abide by basic human rights freedom, that it allows its citizens to have basic freedoms, basic human rights. And I think that if that is impinged on in the near future by the state, there will be discussions. So that the situation, relationship between the European Union and Pakistan is a larger one, but at the same time, the European Union's at least ethos and the European Union remains extremely concerned about how the member states that they have a relationship with treat their own people.
All right, Muniza, talking about strategic stability in South Asia, how important could be or would be the role of the European Union in engaging Pakistan and other regional partners to have a symmetry as far as the strategic stability and the threats to the stability in this region is concerned? I'm talking specifically as far as the relationship between Pakistan and India is concerned. Do you feel the European Union could play a definitive role in that?
Well, certainly the international community remains extremely concerned about the escalation of tension between these two nuclear powers, between these two nuclear neighbors, because the world feels that if the tensions rise, there may be skirmishes, and our nuclear weapons could and not be safe. This is a concern that the European Union has voiced. This is a concern that Western democracies have continuously voiced when engaging with Pakistan, with Pakistani officials. So, of course, there is a deep concern with that, and they have encouraged Pakistan and India to normalize their relationship so that both the countries can benefit. Of course, there is Afghanistan in the region, and the European Union remains very concerned about Afghanistan, about the plight of refugees that remain in Pakistan and how they are going to be repatriated. There's a concern that they should be repatriated with some dignity. So I think the European Union continues to engage with Pakistan on these very important issues. They themselves remain committed to upholding human rights values, democratic values across the globe. And I think in that respect, they are very concerned about what happens here in Pakistan.
All right, thank you very much, Munisa Jahangir. That was a very interesting point of view from Munisa Jahangir, talking about the perspective of and the gamut of relationship that exists between the European Union and Pakistan, and how the EU can also play a role in maybe creating a proper balance in the relationship between Pakistan and India. And also she kind of highlighted the Afghan peace process as well, and how the European Union is also very concerned about that. Now, these two facts are also what were talked about by Shah Mahmood Qureshi while signing this strategic plan with the European Union. The Afghan peace process and Pakistan-India relationship, this gamut, and how the European Union needs to play a very effective role. Do you feel that the EU can engage itself more aggressively in these two aspects?
Yes, they can, because when you see this strategic engagement plan, they have appreciated Pakistan's effort for, or Pakistan's policy for cooperation with all. They have acknowledged Pakistan's efforts on Kartarpur corridor. They have acknowledged Pakistan's effort for Afghan crisis, and particularly they have talked about Kashmir conflict. You see, when we have such kind of platforms available, like European Union or international platforms like UNO, military observer groups are coming to Pakistan, they are being visited to line of control. These kinds of initiatives help you to portray your narrative, your soft image to the rest of the world. You don't have you say your media may not have direct access to the European Union, your media or your market might not have direct linkages with the European Union, but such kind of initiatives actually help you to give you a chance to portray your narrative. So when European Union talks about Pakistan's policy of cooperation with all, they are actually, you can say they are appreciating Pakistan's efforts in the region, as Pakistan is keeping an eye on the regional peace, and Pakistan is looking towards peace in Afghanistan, because peace in Afghanistan is linked with peace in Pakistan. We always say that when it is going to be peace in Afghanistan, it is ultimately going to affect the...
It reflects, of course, in the region. We are the ultimate neighbors. So when there's peace in our neighborhood, there will be peace in our...
But simultaneously, we have a threat of India as a neighbor. So we have to keep a check. And our European Union, interesting thing is that European Union also understands how this growing US, Israel and Indian nexus is, and they can have, they understand that if NATO forces are engaged in Afghanistan, how they have to limitize their role in Afghanistan. See, they can't afford actually to have a direct conflict with US, they can't afford to have a direct conflict in Middle East. They are actually coming in Middle East behind US. So they also need to keep a check on their policy also.
When you talk about keeping a check on their policy, do you feel that the European Union has a strong enough say so as to counter the narrative as you talk about of the United States or Israel?
Right now, at the moment, I think it is not, because USA in front of us is superpower, and to counter its narrative, we have China in our region, which is present as another economic might, which can give a push to US market. So presently, I think US also is not feeling a threat from European Union, or nor European Union is directly engaged with US in any kind of conflict. They actually think that they can play their role, but they keep themselves as somewhat, diplomatically they play very well in internationally, and they know how to keep their soft image in the world community. So they might not engage with direct conflict, engage with in any direct conflict with any kind of country, but they will try to portray themselves as something, a good market in the world, which is going to offer education, which is going to offer tourism, technology, trade. So,
all right. As far as Pakistan's narrative is concerned, when it comes to Kashmir issue, when it comes to Palestine, when it comes to Afghan peace process, do you feel that this strategic engagement plan that Pakistan has signed with the European Union is but also a testament of the fact that the European Union understands Pakistan's points of view on these important issues?
Omar, I think when this government has come into power, first thing they emphasized on this is a foreign policy of Pakistan. You know, in past government, we do not had the foreign minister for a long time, and it actually affected Pakistan's stance in the world community. Now we have a foreign minister and he is making visits to different countries. He has gone to Afghanistan, he has gone to Middle Eastern countries, he has gone to USA, he has gone to European markets and European countries also. So this shows that Pakistan is very much serious about having peace in the region. And when we talk about Kashmir conflict, when we talk about Afghanistan crisis, these two issues directly affect on Pakistan's economy, Pakistan's security, and they portray a challenge to Pakistan's image internationally. And on every platform, when either we talk about our Prime Minister's visit to any country, he always raises this Kashmir issue on his agenda and always say that international community should come forward to resolve this issue and pressurize India to come at least on the dialogue table with Pakistan and talk about Kashmir issue. In first tenure of Modi, we have seen that India wasn't interested in any kind of dialogue, any kind of, peace talks with Pakistan on the issue of Kashmir. They have either labeled Pakistan as terrorist producing country, and they said that let's not talk about Kashmir, let's talk about other issues. So Kashmir issue is one thing on which the basic conflict of India and Pakistan is attached, and we can use international platforms to pressurize India to come on at least on the dialogue table. United Nations, again, unfortunately in front of us is as a mouthpiece which is there and which passes resolutions, but there is no effective implementation so far. And for the past 70 decades, we have seen this
Seven decades,
70 years, past 70 years, Kashmir conflict is in front of us. And same goes for Afghanistan crisis. We see that United States is trying to get out of Afghanistan, but it is unable to come out of it despite 15 years of struggle, and it is unable to counter terrorism. It is unable to defeat that so-called extremism by Al-Qaeda. So there is there is a need that not only Pakistan but other countries also think about how we can have world peace.
All right. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, that this strategic engagement plan between Pakistan and the European Union is going to pave the way for that, as Rima has very ably pointed out, which brings us to our third topic that is as important as peace in the region, that is as important as the Kashmir issue, that is the Palestinian issue. Now, Pakistan has reaffirmed its dedication to the Palestinian cause in 2019, and it has pledged a conference for the cash-strapped United Nations agency, that is the UNRWA, that assists Palestinian refugees by announcing a fresh commitment for financial support. I will quote something that Ambassador Maliha Lodhi said, and she said, the international community must not fail the Palestinian people. Now, as you know, this United Nations agency, the UNRWA, ran into financial trouble more than a year ago when the Trump administration stopped funding this agency and called for the agency to be dissolved. Now, she has asked, and I quote Maliha Lodhi, she says, I humbly ask all donors to maintain their support for the UNRWA at last year's level. Now, this was said also by Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General. He said, we know what is at risk, and I hope that our viewers also understand the risk. Education for 500,000 children, 8 million healthcare visits a year, emergency relief for 1.5 million people in Gaza alone, 1 million Palestinian refugees depend on the UNRWA for food. Last year, the UNRWA relied on extra money from member states, and that was to cover the shortage of $446 million budgetary gap. Now, this year, 1.2 billion US budget was talked about, unchanged from 2018. Now, as far as the UNRWA is concerned, this is an important agency, but it should not be dissolved as per the pressure from any country, because places and states such as Palestine need aid from agencies such as the UNRWA, that is a United Nations agency, and we as a world body, we including Pakistan, need to make the world body understand that Palestine and Palestinian people need to be taken care of, and they need to be told that they are not in any case marginalized. They need to be told that they are people of the world. They are part of us, as are any people of any other nations. And despite pressures from any other country, it's very important for a body like the United Nations to work together with the other countries, as has been told by the Pakistani correspondent, our minister, our representative Dr. Maliha Lodhi, where she has pledged for this fund for the Palestinian refugees, and I hope that the world body will understand. That brings us to the end of today's segment. We'll be back inshallah tomorrow with another program. Take care of yourselves. Allah Hafiz. And Rima, thank you so very much to have joined us today. Allah Hafiz.